Cannabis isn't just a plant, it's a test. And most people are failing it. You've been told weed is either medicine or menace, a spiritual gateway or a mind-numbing escape, sacred or sinful. But here's the truth. None of those labels touch the core of what this plant really is. Cannabis doesn't conform to your beliefs about it. It amplifies what's already within you. And that's what makes it dangerous. Because in ancient traditions, cannabis wasn't a way to pass time. It was a portal, a tool of transformation, used only by those prepared to meet themselves fully. No filters, no distractions. Shamans, mystics, seekers, they used it to dissolve the ego, not decorate it. But today, the plant is everywhere. It's sold like candy, smoked like a trend, worshipped like a lifestyle. What was once a ritual has become routine. The sacred turned into spectacle. This video isn't about weed being good or bad. It's about what it does to your soul. Long before cannabis was ever rolled into a joint or packaged for profit, it was a key, handled carefully, reverently, and only by those who knew what door they were opening. At the dawn of civilization, it was never seen as a recreational pastime. It was a sacred tool, a substance aligned with the rhythms of spirit, used only in the context of ritual, fasting, prayer, and solitude. In ancient India, it was offered to Shiva, the god of destruction and transformation, the one who dissolves illusion so that truth can be born. His devotees, the sadhus, didn't smoke for fun. They smoked to die, at least, to the ego. The chillum wasn't an accessory. It was a sacrament. In Taoist alchemy, cannabis was blended with other herbs to refine energy, to cultivate internal silence, to trigger visionary dreams. It wasn't used to numb the senses, but to awaken subtle perception. Ancient texts describe it as a spirit ally, one that can sharpen insight or unbalance the chi, depending on the user's inner alignment. To the unprepared, it was not a gift, it was a test. Sufi mystics used hashish in ceremonies to dissolve the self in divine presence. But even among them, the plant was controversial. Rumi warned of intoxication that mimics awakening, but leaves the soul untouched. The plant was revered only when it led to annihilation of the ego, not amplification of it. It had to be held like a sword, with respect, or it would cut the hand that held it. Among the Rastafari, cannabis is ganja, the herb of wisdom, the healing of the nations. But it's not just smoked, it's prayed over. It's brought into reasoning sessions, where words and smoke rise together in a shared search for truth. It's a tool of communion, not escape. It is never separate from the liturgy. In those sacred circles, cannabis is not consumed to forget the world, but to remember the divine within it. And yet, here we are. In the modern West, we've turned the sacrament into a souvenir. What once demanded preparation, now demands nothing. You can buy weed in drive-thrus, light up in between texts, and scroll through meaningless content while floating in synthetic calm. The plant is the same, but the context has changed. And without ritual, cannabis loses its compass. When the ceremony disappears, all that's left is sensation, and sensation without direction becomes indulgence. What makes this dangerous isn't the plant itself. It's that we now engage with something once considered sacred as if it were entertainment. Cannabis doesn't offer consistency, it offers amplification. If you're grounded, it deepens you. If you're lost, it magnifies the maze. Most people don't realize they're walking into a temple with muddy feet and wondering why they see only shadows. The plant doesn't decide where it takes you. It holds up a mirror. That mirror reflects everything. Your fears, your unresolved pain, your unspoken questions. It doesn't care about your vibe. It cares about your intention. That's why, in most traditions, the preparation was the real ritual. Fasting, chanting, silence, cleansing, all before the first inhale. Not because of superstition, but because they understood. The mind must be stable before it is expanded. Used with reverence, cannabis is not a drug. It's a door. But doors lead both ways. They open to light, but also to shadow. And the most dangerous illusion is thinking you can handle both when you've prepared for neither. There's a reason why so many people report anxiety, paranoia, or a strange sense of being watched when they smoke weed. Most chalk it up to bad strain, wrong dosage, or a chemical reaction. But what if it's not the weed at all? What if the plant is doing exactly what it was always meant to do? Strip away the noise, pierce through illusion, and show you exactly what's hiding underneath. Carl Jung called it the shadow, the buried aspects of your psyche that you've rejected, forgotten, or never dared to look at. Not evil, but uncomfortable. Not malicious, but inconvenient. It's the grief you didn't process, the anger you swallowed, the truths you couldn't handle. The plant doesn't generate these things. It reveals them. Like an amplifier, it doesn't produce the music. It makes what's already playing louder. And for many, what's playing is unresolved pain. This is the part of cannabis no one likes to talk about, because it doesn't sell as well as relaxation, vibes, or chill. But ask any serious spiritual practitioner, and they'll tell you, the path to awakening always begins in the underworld. Not in visions, but in discomfort. Not in light, but in confrontation. And cannabis, when used consciously, can be one of the most effective tools for that. But only if you're ready. only if you're willing to see your own face without the mask. In mystical psychology, this moment of exposure is sacred. It's not a failure, it's an invitation. The anxiety that creeps in after a puff, that spiraling sense of self-consciousness, that rising paranoia, it's not malfunction, it's feedback. The system is responding to the shift. What's happening isn't you losing control, it's your filters breaking down, your inner guard dogs panicking because the ego's fortress is being breached. But modern culture isn't built to help you through that. There's no one guiding you. No shaman, no elder, no circle. You're alone in your room, staring at the ceiling, heart racing, wondering why you feel like you're dissolving. And the truth is, you are. That's what the plant does. It dissolves the artificial. It burns away the performance. And if you're not prepared for that process, it can feel like a nightmare. Not because the plant is wrong, but because the encounter is real. Esoteric traditions knew this. In psychic self-defense literature, Dion Fortune wrote about altered states making the etheric body porous, susceptible not just to insights but to external energetic interference. If your internal world is chaotic, cannabis doesn't fix it. It turns up the volume. It invites everything to the surface. For healing to happen, it must. But if you run from that surfacing, if you numb it or distract from it, the cycle repeats, again and again, high after high, until nothing feels sacred anymore, only noisy. This is why cannabis, despite being natural, is not automatically safe. It doesn't distinguish between the ready and the unready. It doesn't decide who should see and who should sleep. It simply opens the curtain. What you do with what's behind it is up to you. And here lies the biggest misunderstanding of all. Thinking that the plant is supposed to make you feel better. That's the lie. The truth is, it's supposed to make you see. The pain, the joy, the confusion, it's all information. It's your spirit saying, here, this, look at this. But because we've been trained to fear discomfort, we call those moments bad trips and walk away with nothing. No reflection, no learning. Just another story about how weed made us anxious. But cannabis doesn't make you anxious. It shows you the anxiety you were already carrying. It didn't invent the discomfort. It revealed it. And that makes it one of the most honest substances you'll ever encounter. But honesty isn't always kind. Truth doesn't always feel good. The plant is a mirror. And sometimes, what it shows you isn't pretty. But maybe it's exactly what you needed to see. One of the greatest spiritual traps is mistaking sensation for truth. And cannabis, more than almost any other plant, tempts us into that illusion. You light up, you feel open, thoughts feel deeper, music becomes richer, synchronicities appear like hidden messages from the universe. Your journal fills with insights you'd never write sober. It all feels meaningful, mystical, even. But the question is, does any of it actually transform you? The high, in itself, can be seductive. It mimics transcendence. It mimics peace. But imitation isn't integration. Feeling expanded is not the same as becoming whole. Cannabis can create the appearance of spiritual clarity without the foundation to hold it. And that's what makes it dangerous. Not because it harms the body, but because it tricks the soul into thinking it has arrived. You start to believe you've evolved simply because you felt something profound. But depth isn't measured by intensity. It's measured by what you carry back from the experience and how you live when it fades. Many who smoke regularly report sudden breakthroughs, realizations about their trauma, a sense of oneness with all life, the feeling of being in the moment. And these are real. But the danger comes when those realizations remain floating in the ether, unanchored, unapplied. They turn into what esoteric teachers call spiritual inflation, a swelling of the ego around the feeling of transformation without the work that sustains it. This is what the Hermetic and occult traditions call the false light, experiences that seem enlightened, but are only mental simulations. In Kabbalistic mysticism, it's the sphere of Hod, the brilliance of the intellect, divorced from grounded truth. It glows like gold, but crumbles like ash. You think you've seen the light, but really, you've only seen the mirror. It's no coincidence that many long-term users of cannabis begin to confuse insight with identity. They begin to wear the experience rather than integrate it. They start sounding spiritual, acting awakened, quoting philosophers and mystics. But their lives don't change. Their patterns don't shift. Their relationships don't deepen. Their suffering doesn't dissolve. It simply becomes more poetic. The plant has become a prop in a performance of progress. Osho once said, "Substances open doors that only silence should open." He wasn't denying their power. He was warning about their instability. A door opened by force doesn't stay open. And the vision it offers can distort reality if the mind isn't ready to receive it. The high can become a pedestal from which you look down at others who haven't seen what you've seen, when in reality nothing's been seen clearly, only felt intensely. The problem isn't the insight. It's what you do with it. Cannabis can absolutely offer perspective, but unless that perspective becomes practice, it's just stimulation. If it doesn't shift how you show up in conflict, how you face your shadow, how you serve others, how you move through suffering, then it's a spiritual distraction dressed as awakening. And that's the danger. Not the plant, not the smoke, but the story you tell yourself about what it all means. The high isn't the truth. It's a doorway. But if you stand in the doorway forever, thinking you've arrived, you never actually step into the room. You become addicted not to the substance, but to the illusion of progress. And that illusion is harder to detox from than any chemical dependency. This is why traditions with spiritual depth never worshipped the high. They used it to point to something deeper. They never glorified the vision. They asked what it demanded. Because real awakening isn't what happens on the plant. It's what happens after. It's in the silence that follows, in the choices that emerge, in the humility to realize that seeing something once doesn't mean you understand it. Cannabis offers access, not arrival. But the world doesn't need more access. It needs more anchors, more people who don't just visit the sacred but embody it, who don't just feel the truth, but live it. Cannabis doesn't just affect the mind. It touches the subtle body, the invisible architecture of your being that carries your thoughts, emotions, memories, and energetic imprints. You can't see it, but you can feel it. And when the plant interacts with that field, it doesn't ask for permission. It amplifies whatever is already there. That's why for some, it unlocks intuition, sensitivity, and a heightened sense of presence. For others, it unearths chaos. That chaos isn't random. It's the byproduct of energy that hasn't been cleared. Think of the subtle body as a musical instrument. When it's in tune, cannabis can act like a bow across a string, drawing out resonance, harmony, even silence. But when that instrument is dusty, out of tune, misaligned, all the plant does is amplify the noise. And in that noise, people often confuse stimulation for wisdom. You feel more, but you're not necessarily seeing more. You're just louder inside. And when the inner space is crowded, clarity becomes impossible. Traditions that understand this speak of energetic hygiene. It's not a mystical concept. It's spiritual hygiene, in the same way that showering is physical hygiene. Practices like fasting, breathwork, chanting, cold exposure, prayer, and silence aren't accessories. They're clearing rituals. They stabilize the field. They make sure that when you open the door with a plant like cannabis, you're not stepping into a room full of unresolved debris. In Reiki and other energetic healing practices, cannabis is sometimes described as a field disruptor, not because it's harmful, but because it creates a surge in sensitivity. That surge can help you access subtle energies, but it can also leave you porous. Practitioners who aren't grounded often find their sessions become unstable or chaotic after using the plant. Sensations increase, but control decreases. The same is true in Kundalini work, where cannabis is known to awaken dormant energy before the body is ready to handle it. You feel open, electric, even euphoric, until you don't, until you crash, spiral, or find yourself unable to ground the experience in any meaningful way. Amazonian shamans say that every plant opens, but every plant also tests, and cannabis is no exception. They believe that each plant carries a consciousness, a spirit, a frequency, and when that spirit enters you, it begins to communicate, not in language, but in emotion, in memory, in energetic sensation. If you're not clean, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, that communication becomes scrambled. The plant becomes distorted by your own residue, and instead of clarity, you get confusion dressed in insight's clothing. This is why so many people feel drained, unfocused, or emotionally raw after heavy cannabis use. Not because the plant is inherently draining, but because they entered into it unprepared. No clearing, no containment, no reverence. It's like plugging a delicate instrument into a distorted amplifier with frayed wires. The result isn't music. It's noise, and the longer you're exposed to it, the more it wears down your sensitivity. Cannabis interacts with the energy body like fire, interacts with a dry forest. It spreads, it consumes, it brings light, but only if the space is clean. Otherwise, it just burns. Without grounding, without clarity, without intentional boundaries, what was meant to elevate can begin to fragment. You lose focus, you lose willpower. You start living in a fog that feels peaceful, but underneath is a dull kind of stagnation. And here's the subtle danger. You begin to call that fog calm. You begin to associate the dulling of sensation with healing. But healing isn't numbness. Healing is clarity. Healing is the return of power, not its suspension. And cannabis, when used without energetic awareness, can temporarily mask imbalance instead of resolving it. So the question becomes, is your system clean enough for clarity? Have you prepared your inner temple before you invite the plant in? Because cannabis doesn't clean the house, it just turns on the lights. What you see depends entirely on what was already there. Once upon a time, cannabis was only used when the soul was ready. Now, it's used because the weekend's here. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was slow, subtle, and disguised as liberation. What used to be sacred became symbolic. What used to be intentional became impulsive. We went from smoker's spirit to smoker's content. And in the process, the plant didn't lose its power. We just lost our way of holding it. In Rastafarian tradition, cannabis wasn't something you did alone in your room to cope with stress. It was integrated into sacred reasoning sessions, ritual gatherings for philosophical and spiritual reflection. The smoke rose with the chants, with the prayers, with the heartbeat of drums. It was a communal ascent, not a personal escape. It wasn't about feeling good. It was about finding alignment with Jah, God, Source, the One. And if your heart wasn't clean, the herb would show you. It wasn't entertainment. It was an initiation. In the African diaspora, especially within Afro-Brazilian religions like Candomblé and Umbanda, cannabis wasn't always central, but the concept behind its use was. Every plant was seen as holding an axe, a spiritual frequency, a purpose, a vibration. To misuse a plant was to misuse its energy, and to do that was to invite imbalance. The ritual determined the effect. The ceremony created the container. Nothing sacred was taken without being earned. There was no casual consumption, only communion. But that's not what the modern world wanted. Ritual requires time, discipline, and humility. Ritual is inconvenient, and capitalism thrives on convenience. So, the plant was extracted from its cultural roots, sanitized for mass consumption, and rebranded as a lifestyle. Now it's wrapped in sleek packaging, endorsed by influencers, and sold with the same pitch as a wellness smoothie. This will make you feel better. No mention of shadow, no mention of mirrors. Just mood boards, pastel fonts, and a shallow nod to mindfulness. The sacred was commercialized. The ceremony was deleted. And cannabis became a product, not a portal. Now people light up while binge-watching shows that feed them more programming. They scroll while smoking, swiping through empty content designed to hijack their dopamine. There is no circle, no chant, no silence, just stimulation on top of stimulation. And in that layered chaos, the plant becomes fog instead of fire, numbness instead of clarity. Even the festivals that claim to be spiritual, burning incense, playing ecstatic music, selling chakra stickers, often reduce the plant to background noise. The ritual becomes a performance. The ceremony becomes a costume. And the true essence of the plant, the part that could transform, disrupt, awaken, is buried under layers of aesthetics. But cannabis has no interest in being aesthetic. Its spirit is old, wild, and unapologetically real. It doesn't care about your branding. It cares about your intention. And without a container, its energy spills. It flows into your distractions, into your anxieties, into your unchecked wounds. Without direction, it simply amplifies your current state. That's why some people feel inspired, and others feel stuck. Same plant, different vessel. So when we stripped away the ritual, we stripped away the structure that made the experience sacred. Without that, what's left is entertainment masked as healing, a mimicry of depth, a hollow echo of what once was holy. The plant has not changed, but the way we use it has. And until we reclaim the container, we'll keep wondering why the experience feels shallow, inconsistent, or even chaotic. It's not that cannabis lost its power. We just stopped preparing ourselves to receive it. The ritual was never a performance for the divine. It was a way to prepare you, to cleanse your mind, your energy, your heart. So when the plant opened the door, you walked through it with grace, not confusion. We didn't lose the sacred. We stopped recognizing it. The most dangerous lie is that intention alone is enough. That if you mean well, the plant will guide you. But cannabis, like all true spiritual allies, doesn't operate on sentiment. It responds to energy, to readiness, to the clarity of your inner world, not your wishful thinking. Too many seekers approach it with curiosity, but no compass. They light up to feel better, to think deeper, to escape boredom, or soften the edges of stress. But they forget that the plant doesn't give you peace. It reveals whether or not peace was already there. Used with discernment, cannabis can be a profound ally. It can help you detach from the noise of the ego, see your patterns more clearly, and soften the grip of your internal narratives. But the key is never the plant itself. The key is who you are when you meet it. Without structure, the experience becomes slippery. Without reflection, the insight evaporates. Without grounding, the openness turns to fragmentation. So how do you use the plant without being used by it? First, by understanding that cannabis should never be your first response. If you feel anxious, don't smoke. Sit with it. Ask it questions. If you're restless, don't escape. Move your body. Breathe deeply. Journal. Only when the body is settled and the mind is clear can the plant act as a tool of refinement rather than disruption. Before using, ask yourself, what am I seeking? Clarity or comfort? Truth or temporary relief? Am I reaching for the plant out of alignment or avoidance? There's a massive difference between using cannabis to explore consciousness and using it to mute what consciousness is trying to tell you. One is sacred. The other is just another loop. The wisest traditions never relied on cannabis alone. It was always one element in a larger spiritual ecosystem. Fasting, silence, chanting, prayer, breathwork, cleansing rituals. These were not unnecessary traditions. They were spiritual hygiene. They were the practices that helped prepare the vessel, clear the clutter, and tune the nervous system so that the plant could do its deeper work. Grounding practices matter. Smoke in silence. Sit on the earth. Stay off your phone. Turn off the background noise. Let the plant guide you inward, not outward. Write down what comes. Reflect. Integrate. Take what you learn and bring it into how you move, how you speak, how you love. That's where the real alchemy happens. Not in what you see, but in what you do with what you see. Cannabis without integration becomes a form of spiritual entertainment. You start chasing the feeling instead of doing the work. It becomes part of your identity. You begin to associate your depth with the plant, as if you cannot access wisdom without it. And that's the beginning of dependency, not chemical, but existential. You forget that the plant is just a mirror. The depth was always within you. The cannabis just helped reveal it. The real journey begins when you can access that state without anything external. You are not meant to live inside the high. You're meant to bring what you found there back into your daily life. The insight is not the prize. The application is. The transformation is. Can you be kind without needing to feel euphoric? Can you stay present without chemical help? Can you walk through conflict, boredom, routine, and still remain awake? This is how you use the plant without losing yourself. By never letting it become your source of meaning. By returning to yourself as the center. The plant may open the door, but only you can walk the path. And if you're not walking, you're just circling, feeling more, learning nothing. You don't need more highs, you need more honesty. The kind of honesty that isn't always pleasant, but always real. The kind that strips away the glittering illusions and asks, is this helping me grow or just helping me hide? Cannabis was never meant to be used in isolation. Across cultures, lineages, and centuries, its spiritual use was almost always collective. Not because people couldn't access altered states on their own, but because those who understood the plant knew this. Without a container, power becomes unpredictable. And without community, insight turns to distortion. The plant might open you, but it's the circle that holds you. In the Rastafari tradition, cannabis is not smoked casually. It's part of reasoning sessions, gatherings where the herb is passed with reverence, accompanied by scripture, discussion, chanting, and the conscious pursuit of divine truth. It's not about getting high. It's about getting aligned. Words are shared with weight. Silence is respected. Everyone becomes both student and teacher. The herb moves clockwise, like time, like energy, like the sacred wheel of life. In that space, cannabis is not the focus. It is the bridge. The same is true among certain indigenous traditions. In Amazonian and Central African cultures, while cannabis may not always be central like ayahuasca or tobacco, the principles are the same. Substances that alter perception are only taken when the group, the ritual, and the intention are in place. The experience belongs not to the individual but to the container, the song, the prayer, the fire, the elders, the unseen spirits watching from the edges. You don't journey alone. Even when your eyes are closed, the circle holds you. It's not just about what the plant shows you. It's about what others help you interpret when you return. Contrast that with the modern experience. A joint in one hand, a phone in the other. No grounding, no preparation, no exit strategy, just stimulus and solitude. What's supposed to be sacred becomes another episode of dissociation, and that's where the spiral begins. Because when you're cracked open and no one's there to help close you, the insight doesn't integrate, it fragments. You begin to think you've tapped into something profound, but there's no witness, no mirror, no calibration. It becomes a private religion of half-remembered thoughts and disconnected realizations. And you mistake loneliness for enlightenment. But when you're in a real circle, something different happens. You're heard, you're seen. You're reminded that your insight is part of a larger truth. That what you experienced matters not just for you, but for the community. You become responsible for what the plant gave you. Because the plant doesn't just give, it tasks you. It asks, what will you do with this vision? Will you live differently? Will you serve? Will you heal? In sacred circles, the ego has less room to perform. You can't pretend you're awakened when someone else in the circle sees through your facade. You can't claim transformation without being held accountable. There's no place to hide inside the ceremony. And that's exactly why it works. Because it's not about how the plant makes you feel. It's about how the experience is witnessed. The circle prevents illusion from becoming doctrine. When you're alone, there's no challenge, no resistance. And so everything feels true. But not everything you feel is truth. Not every idea that emerges in the high is sacred. Some are projections. Some are distortions. Some are just mental noise wearing spiritual clothing. The circle helps you sort the signal from the static. It helps you test the vision in the light of shared reality. Even in modern cities, sacred containers can be created. A few friends, candles lit, phones off. A clear intention spoken aloud. A shared moment of silence, before and after. A commitment to reflect, to hold space. To not just trip but to transform. You don't need a jungle or a temple to do it right. You need reverence. You need a ritual. You need community. Without it, cannabis floats like incense in a windy room. Beautiful, but directionless. The plant asks for structure because its spirit is powerful, and like any power, it magnifies whatever it touches. In a collective setting, it can magnify clarity, healing, vision. Alone and ungrounded, it can magnify confusion, illusion, or ego. So maybe the question is no longer just what are you smoking for? Maybe it's who are you smoking with? Because the presence or absence of a sacred container often determines whether the plant becomes your teacher or your distraction. There comes a point in every seeker's journey where the thrill of the experience begins to lose its meaning. The novelty wears off. The visions become repetitive. The insights start to echo things you've heard before. And that's when the deeper path begins. Not with more intensity, but with more honesty. Because the real work is not in what you see when you're high, but in what you do when you're sober. Discernment, becomes the new high. Not stimulation, but clarity. Not euphoria, but alignment. Cannabis can open doors. That's never been in question. But opening doors is easy. Walking through them with intention, with integration, with humility, that's what most avoid. Because it's much easier to chase the feeling of awakening than to do the work of actually awakening. It's easier to light up than to sit still. Easier to feel deep than to live deep. But feeling something doesn't make it true, and seeing something doesn't make it real. Discernment is what separates illusion from insight. It's what keeps you from mistaking echo for essence. In Greek philosophy, discernment was called kro, the inner blade that cuts through deception. In Vedanta, it's viveka, the power to distinguish the real from the unreal. This isn't about skepticism. It's about spiritual maturity. It's the ability to question even your most profound experiences, to ask, is this truth, or is this just what I wanted to hear? Because cannabis will give you both. It will speak in riddles, in poetry, in emotion. And if you're not grounded, you'll build entire belief systems out of metaphors that were never meant to be taken literally. That's where spiritual inflation begins. The ego rebrands itself as awakened. It starts speaking in mystic terms, wearing the garments of transcendence, quoting scriptures without ever living them. It becomes addicted not to the plant, but to the feeling of being special, of being in the know. You start to confuse sensitivity for superiority, and you stop listening to anything that doesn't support your high. This is why discernment must be cultivated before cannabis becomes a spiritual tool. Because without it, you're not opening to higher truth, you're just rearranging the furniture inside your own delusion. The plant amplifies what's already there. If you carry confusion, it will bloom. If you carry clarity, it will deepen. The plant doesn't discriminate, it simply reflects. And so the question becomes, are you willing to sharpen your inner blade? Are you willing to ask uncomfortable questions about your intentions, your expectations, your patterns? Are you willing to set the plant down when it no longer serves your growth? That might be the hardest test of all, not to use the plant when you don't need it. To realize that the wisdom was never in the leaf, but in how the leaf helped you remember your own. Cannabis is not the path. It's a compass. It can point, it can direct, but it cannot walk the way for you, and it certainly can't carry you. The plant may hold a mirror, but mirrors don't create. They reflect. They don't move. You do. And if the reflection becomes the focus, you forget what it was there to show you in the first place. This is the moment many never reach. They stop at the sensation. They stop at the poetry. But the mystics, the seekers, the ones who truly walk the path, they go further. They learn to trust the quiet after the high. They learn to listen for the messages that don't come wrapped in euphoria. They learn to sit with discomfort and ask what it's here to teach. Because the goal is not to stay high. The goal is to stay awake. Not just when the plant opens your eyes, but when you wake up every morning and choose to live aligned, grounded, and real. That's the true spiritual practice. That's the path beyond illusion. There comes a point when every tool must be laid down, every shortcut surrendered, every high examined for what it truly was. A spark, a signal, a beginning, not a destination. Cannabis is not the answer. It never was. At its best, it is a teacher. At its worst, it becomes another distraction dressed as depth. And if you're listening, truly listening, you'll know when it's time to stop chasing the smoke and start building the fire within yourself. The greatest lesson cannabis can teach you is that you never needed it. Not because it's worthless, but because its power was always meant to reflect something dormant inside you, something waiting to be remembered. The clarity you felt was yours. The stillness, the insight, the connection. None of that came from the plant. The plant only peeled back what you'd forgotten how to feel. But remembering is not the same as becoming. The journey doesn't end with what you saw. It begins with what you do now. This is why the ancient traditions never glorified the plant. They respected it. They used it as a doorway, but never as a crutch. The ceremony ended, and the integration began. You took what you saw and turned it into action, into presence, into humility. You walked into conflict differently. You loved with fewer conditions. You served from a deeper place. That's the point. That's the whole point. What good is vision if you never change how you live? What use is insight if you never apply it in the mess, in the boredom, in the discomfort of your actual life? It's easy to feel spiritual in smoke and silence. Harder in traffic, in heartbreak, in the endless repetition of the ordinary. But that's where real spiritual growth happens. Not on the mountaintop, but in the valley. Not in the altered state, but in the everyday choice to remain awake when it would be easier to sleep. Integration isn't glamorous. It's not psychedelic. It's not aesthetic. It's discipline. It's a follow-through. It's knowing when to close the door to ceremony and open the door to life, and to walk through it with grace. This is what the plant asks of you. Not reverence, not worship, but embodiment. You were never meant to become dependent on the teacher. You were meant to graduate. You're not here to orbit meaning. You're here to make it real. To take the fragments of truth you've glimpsed and ground them into the way you speak, the way you listen, the way you show up when no one's watching. That's where the plant becomes legacy. Not just a substance you use, but a spirit that shaped you. Not a high you chased, but a mirror you faced, again and again, until it showed you something real. And here's what's real. The sacred doesn't need cannabis. The sacred is already in you. The question is, are you willing to live like it? Are you willing to stop looking for the signal outside and start transmitting it from within? This conversation doesn't end here. If you've made it this far, then you're already seeking more than just sensation. Some are meant to be studied, lived, embodied. Because in the end, it's not about the plant, it's about you. Not about what you smoke, but what you become. Not about the highs, but how you walk through the lows. The plant showed you a glimpse of what's possible. Now you decide whether to chase the light or become it. If this video resonated with you, let us know by commenting.